When we hear something unexpected, even something bad, what is the difference between our reacting with distress or with acceptance? Even the same news can be heard in dramatically different ways depending on who is telling us, when they tell us, and how they tell us. If an old adversary tells us something, we mistrust, we doubt, we resist. But if a trusted friend tells us the same thing, we can hear it much better. There are two incidents at the beginning of this week's Parsha which puzzle us, and they bear on how they are told. One of them has precedent in the Torah, the other doesn't. Both cases include promises that will shape the Jewish people for generations. The first is when, near the end of his life, Jacob formally adopts his grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, as his own. Legally speaking, they will now be like sons to Jacob. It is because of this adoption that, while there is no tribe of Joseph in the Torah, there are tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. Joseph's sons are elevated to the same standing as Jacob's own sons, and will henceforth be the fathers of great tribes like their uncles. Jacob's reason for adopting his grandsons seems to derive from guilt, if not outright fear. He tells Joseph that he is adopting Ephraim and Manasseh because, quote, "When I was returning from Padan, Rachel died, to my sorrow, while I was journeying in the land of Canaan, when still some distance short of Ephrat, and I buried her there on the road to Ephrat." A first reading of the passage might leave us bewildered. Jacob seems to be saying that he's adopting his grandsons because his wife died. What makes that logic easier to understand is to remind ourselves that Rachel was Joseph's mother, and that when she died, she was not interred in the cave of Machpelah with the other patriarchs and matriarchs, including her sister Leah, and that Jacob is about to die and very much wants to be buried there. Seen in that light, Jacob's explanation of the adoption begins to make more sense. The medieval commentators, including Rashi and Ramban, note that Jacob has cause to think that his son Joseph harbors a grudge against him for the way he responded at the time of Rachel's death, and that Jacob is here trying to explain his actions to his son while he still can. The commentators point out that his words are actually Meta alai Rachel, not simply Rachel died, but more literally, Rachel died on me. In other words, her death was sudden and unexpected, and he had to act quickly, and perhaps not in the way he would have liked to have acted. He may be fearing that after his own death, that Joseph will bury him in Egypt, outside the family crypt, like Rachel was buried. And so, in addition to his explanation of what happened with her, he now also elevates Joseph's sons to the same status as Joseph's brothers, giving Joseph an added incentive to honor his father's last wishes for his own burial. The second incident that is sometimes a puzzle is when immediately after the incident describing the adoption, Jacob gives his blessing to Ephraim and Manasseh. What is unusual here, or perhaps usual depending on how you look at it, is that Jacob reverses their birth order, placing his right hand, the hand of the blessing, on the head of the younger Ephraim, going so far as to cross his arms to do so when Joseph places Manasseh, the older brother, on Jacob's right. Now this isn't actually unusual because the motif of the younger brother usurping the rights of the older is a constant feature of the book of Genesis. We only have to mention the experience of Jacob himself, and his theft of his brother Esau's blessing is the most recent example, but there are many others as well. The message here seems to be, life can upend our expectations, even those built on the strongest traditions, such as the older brother having precedence. Joseph can be pleased with his two sons' new higher status. He can be surprised or displeased with the elevation of Ephraim over Manasseh, but he never objects that these are not Jacob's decisions to make. Taken together, these two incidents from the end of the patriarch Jacob's life suggest that he had some emotional catch-up work to do with his son Joseph. The gap in their relationship caused by their many years apart severed its continuity. And when they meet again, it is Joseph who is clearly in charge. Jacob risks looking like he is bribing Joseph, or at least making a clumsy attempt to buy the loyalty that we might otherwise assume is his due. It would have been preferable to share his feelings about Rachel at any time over the 17 years that he has been living in Egypt, rather than to wait until shortly before his own death. But perhaps it is only the impending end of his life that forces his hand, motivating him to ensure his own interment plans in Canaan by saying things that he would not otherwise say. That is a shame, but it is also true to life. Jacob says what he really feels at the end of his life, not knowing if even that will be enough to convince Joseph to do as he wishes. But what else can he do? He tells his son what happened when his mother died, and then makes a magnanimous gesture to try to achieve some kind of emotional recompense. Interestingly, Joseph does not object any further. It is as if, having heard his father's confessions about Rachel's death and burial, and having accepted his own son's adoption as Jacob's sons, he can now accept this bit of unanticipated news about the boy's birth order. What Joseph learns, and what we are supposed to learn, is that there is a time for feeling sad or hurt or surprised, and there is a time to accept how things are and to get on with life. What makes that lesson palatable for Joseph is his father's honesty about the past and his own feelings, and his attempts to come to terms with those feelings now. After hearing his father's heartfelt words and having been given the gift of future tribal leadership to his sons, it would be poor form for Joseph to object to the Ephraim and Manasseh thing. Sometimes, when someone is open with us and direct, we can accept what they say even if we don't like it. Understanding another person's motives goes a long way toward accepting their actions. We won't always agree or like what they say, but we can accept it. Joseph hears his father's words in the spirit in which they were intended, to explain, to recompense, to heal. That makes it possible for him to accept his father's words and to promise to take care of him as he nears the end. It also makes it possible for Jacob to end his life in peace. Having gone through so much together, his words turn Jacob's departure from the scene into a blessing that it was not assured of being. The telling and the hearing interact in a loving exchange that heals their relationship prior to death. It is difficult to lose a parent, but the Torah teaches us that honesty and forgiveness at the end of life can help transform a parent's death into a sacred occasion. From all of us at Congregation Beth Judea, a Shabbat Shalom.